Thank you so much for being here. I'm Rory Hoffstetler, and I'm the Assistant Director of the West Virginia Regional History Center. I do know some of the folks who've been here, maybe everyone who's here has researched at the center at one time or the other. But we are the Archives and Special Collections Division of WVU Library, so we specialize in historical records, documents, primary sources, but also secondary sources. And our mission is to collect and preserve the history of the state of West Virginia and the Central Appalachian region. So we're open to the general public, and we collect all these things and we make them available for research. We're here this evening to talk about West Virginia history makers, Black women activists in the archives, and that's part of our project, the West Virginia Feminist Activist Collection Project, where we're actively going around and trying to collect records that tell the story of people, men, women, and organizations who have worked to change the lives and improve the lives of women in West Virginia. And that's people from all different walks of life doing all different kinds of activities. And we strive to be able to tell those stories in the future. And a lot of people don't realize that that's how we do historical research, and that's how we how history is saved, is through a lot of the records that we keep. So we have all kinds of things like letters and photographs and maps and books, and all of those kinds of materials. Different researchers will come in, like our historians that are going to talk, and they use those to document people's stories. And so our interest really came about from someone right here in Charleston, Christine Doherty, who was a activist who worked to get women jobs in non-traditional fields, and has done all kinds of other things in her career to support women through support social justice causes and economic justice causes. And it was her idea, like, hey, I know a lot of people who've done a lot of things over the last 50 years to help women and to promote women. And but we're, how is history being saved? And so Christine brought a group of people together, and we started talking about how can we do that. And so that's how the West Virginia Feminist Activist Collection started. We realized already at the archives that we have some women's history, but we're lacking a lot. And that's in part because over the years, women's history wasn't collected as much, and Black women's history even collected less. But we realize now that to have a full record that we want to collect from everybody, that we want to tell the stories and be able to record the histories of all people. And so this project is aimed to do that. Most people don't think, why would somebody want my stuff? Why would somebody want the flyers or the letters that I've collected or the emails that I've collected? And they don't realize that their things are important too. So that's part of why we wanted to have this program, was to hear some amazing history of West Virginia women, West Virginia Black women, but also to educate about archives and to let people know that your history is important and that your records might be important. So I won't dwell on that longer, but we are located in Morgantown, open to the public, doing historical research. We're the place to go. And I do have a handout that has contact information and everything on it available. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker. Our first speaker is Dr. Sheena Harris. I'm going to read her biography. So Sheena Harris earned her BS in political science and her master's from Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University in political science and history. She received her PhD in history from the University of Memphis. Dr. Harris joined the History Department at West Virginia University as an associate professor and coordinator of the Africana Studies program in 2021. Prior to joining WVU, Dr. Harris served as associate professor and the inaugural director of student engagement initiatives at Tuskegee University. Her book, Margaret Murray Washington, The Life and Times of a Career Clubwoman, explores the political and public activism of Washington from 1861 to 1925. She has also published works on women during slavery, Black women in reality TV, and 19th century Black women's club movement, and the 19th century Black women's club movement. Dr. Harris also serves on the editorial board for the Black Soldiers in the War and Society, New Narratives and Critical Perspectives series at the University of Virginia, and is the National Membership Director for the Association of Black Women Historians. In 2019, she appeared on the hit TV show, Who Do You Think You Are?, with actress Regina King. Dr. Harris is a United States Army veteran of Operation Iraqi Freedom and runs marathons in her free time. Without further ado, we introduce Dr. Sheena Harris. Thank you.
This off and attempt to project as much as possible. And hopefully this can be something that's interactive as well as we venture through the archives together. Thank you for the welcome, and thank you, Charleston, for having me here today. So what we're going to briefly talk about within a 20-25 minute time block are two women who were very, very influential to starting what becomes Tuskegee University. And so I'm going to sort of talk about how I got to them and some of the motivations that led me there. You can't see it, I'm going to also read it to you, but hopefully you don't feel as though I am reading to you. So how I came to Olivia and Fanny, really this complex and often underrepresented lives of Black female administrators at historically Black colleges and universities. And so looking at the universities and their structures, but attempting to focus on the women, right? And what they're doing within those spaces. And one of the things that also was shared in my biography is that I just completed a book on Margaret Murray Washington, which is sort of the third piece to these two, because she's going to marry Booker T. Washington last. And so you'll kind of hear about her a little bit, but because she also lived the longest, there are more records and files on her, and she actually has a collection. And so by going through a lot of her papers, you're able to also kind of tease out what these other women were doing who also are going to die prior to her coming to Tuskegee. The other one was viewing women's oppression and Black oppression as mutually exclusive. And so just thinking about these women as women in the terms of gender, but also thinking about the struggles and the challenges that they'll have in terms of race as well, is something that brought it to the forefront. And women who are married to powerful men, which is an interesting concept, but one of the stories I like to share is one of the ways that I came to Margaret Murray Washington was that I read an article by Jacqueline Ann Rouse, Out of the Shadow of Tuskegee. And during the article, she says, Mrs. Booker T. Washington, and then she'll say Fanny. And she's like, Mrs. Booker T. Washington, and she'll say Olivia. And then she's like, Mrs. Booker T. Washington, Margaret. And I'm new to the field, so I'm wondering, hold up, now how many first names does Mrs. Booker T. Washington have? And so I think that was one of the first things that pulled me towards who are these women and why are they being led through this male entering into these spaces. And so I think understanding the time period of how that allows them entrance, but then also being able to go back into the records and then give them their space as well. Questions of responsibility and fulfillment, I think that was something that was continuously coming up in terms of we think about these activists and we think about the work that they're doing, but who are these people as women? Who are they as mothers? Who are they as educators? Who are they as community leaders? And so thinking about them as an individual as opposed to their connection to a spouse or their connection in this particular instance to an institution. And then the relationship of the personal and history as well. And so while I wanted to know who they were professionally, also who they are personally and how that's influencing where they are in the archives, right? Where their absences are in the archives, and sort of how those absences can also have voice, or lend itself to voice. So the women behind the Institute, oftentimes and I'm just going to assume that you know the background history of Tuskegee because we don't have a lot of time, right? So with the backdrop of Tuskegee, oftentimes when the narrative is read, it's read from the two males, Campbell and Anderson, who are bringing Washington into Tuskegee, and then Washington being the key principal, and then building out the school, right? And so I think one of the things that we find is that he is not doing it alone, and if he's not doing it alone, who's assisting within this? And so those were the initial questions that I'm asking in the archives. The other thing is that I'm asking these questions initially through the lens of his last wife. And so I'm asking who started the Institute that then she is going to be able to come into in 1889, 8 years later, and it's already formed, right? And so how did this one man do this without any assistance? And so those were just some of the initial things in terms of going into the archives. So what we find is Olivia America Davidson, and then the other one that we find is Fanny Smith. Olivia Davidson, I'm generally talking about her first because she's born first, even though she is going to be the second wife. Fanny Smith is born second, obviously she's not born first, and she's going to be the first wife, but she's also going to be the one who dies first. So Fanny Smith is going to die in 1884, and because her earlier years are ambiguous, but she's born during the period of slavery, far less is known about Fanny Smith within the archives. Then there's far more known about Olivia because of some of the privileges as a Black woman born during the period of slavery extended to her, and because of what she was able to do in the beginning years. And then, as I said in the beginning, majority of the information you can find within Margaret's collection of information because she's living longer and she's living through a period where people are writing more letters, people are having more connections, and she's going to be over the National Association as well, which is going to influence how her papers are seen within the archives. So, Olivia America, some things that we know about her. Olivia America is going to be born in what becomes West Virginia. She is going to be born of free parents, right? So this also is going to in many ways change her or make her experience a little different than what Fanny's experience is and what Margaret's experience is as well. So she's born to free parents. Her mother, interestingly, but still trying to figure out what was happening, is going to have her first child when she's 12. And so she's not going to have another child until 10 years later. Right? When Olivia is born, she's going to be one of 7, but she's ultimately going to be one of 10. During that time period too, attempting to trace those 10 have been a little difficult, but there are 5 that we have been able to trace within the archives. Others were able to trace through stories that Olivia is going to retell. So, a side note, there has been a new book that was just written by Allison Parker on Mary Church Terrell. And Mary Church Terrell, I'm sure everyone knows her, but this is the first full-length biography that's written on Mary Church Terrell. One of the things that really sets this apart is that she was able to get access to Mary Church Terrell's diaries. And that just really changes everything. In the absence of diaries, what Olivia was able to do and able to do really successfully is oral histories. And so she oftentimes told her and retold her stories to different administrators who would write it. She would retell her story to people within the community who would then share her story again to someone who would write it. And so now we have access to her beginning stories through these oral histories that are eventually being written. Fanny Smith is not going to leave that type of record. And so a lot of what we get from Fanny is really going to be her lived experiences once she gets to Tuskegee. This is just some things that were pulled out of the archives. I'll read them. Her journey to Tuskegee. So the first one is from the Tuskegee Student from 1912, and it says, while very young, she moved to Ohio where she received a common school education. And one thing that we're also able to see from Olivia is because she's able to have this luxury, our freedom, our privilege of travel, she's also able to move into spaces where education for Black children and Black youth is far more prevalent than what Fanny is going to get. We're going to see Fanny going into the classroom as late as 17 years old, where Olivia is teaching in the classroom at 17, and she's already left home. The second one is from the Southern Workman in 1889. It says, at the death of her brother, said to be at the hands of the Ku Klux Klan, she went to Memphis, Tennessee and resumed school, teaching until her work was interrupted in 1878 by a yellow fever pandemic. And so here we have again where she's telling her story, but through the archives you're also able to trace it because of national events that are happening within those particular areas. Education. Another way that we're able to trace Olivia is because she's going to be very well educated. Because of her education as well, the school's archives really have, not as much as Margaret, right? But they really have kept records and letters that she's written back that allows us to develop these stories about who was Olivia as a student? What did she care about? One of the things that we find is that when she goes to Hampton, because of her privileges that she's having throughout her experiences in Ohio, she's able to skip all of the grades and just go for 1 year and graduate, right? And not only is she graduating in 1 year, but she's also graduating with the highest honors. In later oral histories that she's going to give, she's really going to say that she didn't feel as though Hampton challenged her enough. When she leaves Hampton, she's ultimately going to go into the community, right? Until she's able to have another opportunity where someone is going to fund her education and where she's going to be able to further it, and she's going to move into Massachusetts. And from there, that's when she comes to Tuskegee because she's ultimately continuously attempting to advance her scholarship. The other thing that we find at Framingham is that she's going to do a master's kind of thesis on pedagogy. And so that really also is like a gold mine in the sense of her influence at Tuskegee within those beginning years, building out not only the industrial curriculum, but also the girls' industrial and the girls' arts and sciences type of curriculum as well. Travel, privilege. Olivia is going to have many experiences with travel. So she's going to go from West Virginia. By the age of 5, her family is going to find itself in Ohio. Within Ohio, she's going to get majority, and tell me if I'm out of time because I can just talk, okay? Once she's in Ohio, she's going to get a number of educational experiences, but it's always never going to be enough for her. I oftentimes say that Olivia and Booker T. Washington in many ways are like kindred spirits, never able to settle in what they're doing and always looking for the next thing to do. And so she leaves Ohio. We know that she's going to leave Ohio roughly around the age of 16, 17 years old. At that time, she's going to have a sister that is in Hernando, Mississippi. Her sister that's in Mississippi, Olivia is going to also move with her brother, who you saw through oral history, is going to be killed by the Klan. When her brother is killed by the Klan, she's ultimately going to leave Mississippi and then travel to Memphis, Tennessee. While in Memphis, Tennessee, she is also eager to go into the classroom and teach as well, until she's then moved into going into graduate school. Once she goes into graduate school, once she leaves Tennessee, she's going to go into Virginia and Massachusetts for schooling, and then she's going to find her way into Alabama. And so you see this travel that you're not really seeing in his other wives. So even if we look at Fanny or Margaret, most of them are staying in their place of birth until they're much older and ready to go to school, whereas you see Olivia doing a lot more traveling. So Fanny Smith, how am I on time? Okay, so Fanny Smith, like I said, Fanny Smith is going to be Booker T. Washington's sweetheart, polar opposite in what we're able to see in terms of who Fanny Smith was, in terms of her personality. So she's going to be far more quiet, and she's far more less to tell oral histories about her origins, who she was, where she came from. Most of the things that she did speak about were generally going to be connected to Washington, right? So she was the one that generally allowed Washington to say, this is where we're from. As in terms of, in comparison to Olivia, she's telling her story often. There's a quote from Booker T. Washington in Up From Slavery, and he says, in the days of slavery, not very much attention was given to family history and family records, that is, Black family records. And so you don't generally see in the archives yet, hopefully there is something that someone see this and they send it to me, where she's retelling that family history. She's not. The only thing that you really get to see in terms of family history is that once she goes to Hampton, she's going to leave Hampton because there is a discrepancy in terms of how she's able to pay for her tuition. She went thinking that she had a full scholarship, but she did not have a full scholarship in terms of what Armstrong is writing to Booker T. Washington. So through those letters, we're able to see how she thought she was paying for school. And from there, she has to go back to West Virginia and help her mother as she's raising money within domestic entities before she can return back to Hampton. So Booker T. Washington and Fanny. So Booker T. Washington and Fanny are going to be what I would say is childhood sweethearts. And so when Booker T. Washington comes back to West Virginia, grudgingly, does not want to come back, but he comes back at that particular time because he's also in between spaces of what am I going to do next? What opportunity is going to open up itself? There's going to be an opportunity where a school for colored children is going to open, and he is going to agree to teach there. While he's teaching there, Fanny is also going to be one of his pupils. She's going to be 17, and at that particular time, he's 19. The other thing that Washington is doing when he comes back to West Virginia is he basically is serving as a liaison to, or a pipeline to Hampton. Can I keep walking closer? He's serving as a pipeline to Hampton. So as he's educating these young adults in many ways, he's also getting them prepared to go to Hampton. So he's helping them and connecting them with Armstrong to ensure that they have scholarships and so on and so forth. He does this so much that the school's pupils are ultimately going to be considered Booker T. Washington boys, right? And so she's also lumped up into this group, even though she is not a boy. So they start this young love affair, and she's ultimately going to graduate from Hampton in 1882. I just fast forward, right? So she's graduating, she leaves for a period of time, she helps her mother. I want to say just from the top of my head, the amount that she had to save up was like $32 or something like that. And it took her about 2 years to save that up. in the letters that Washington is writing to Armstrong, he's basically saying that although she's gone home to work, most of her funds are going to helping her mother with the household incomes. And so it's also not very clear on where her father is at this particular time as well. How am I? 5. All right, so really fast. So Fanny's journey we see is a little bit more cut dry, right? So she goes from West Virginia and she stays in West Virginia until she goes to Hampton. Once she's in Hampton, of course, as I've said already, she doesn't go and complete her studies. She goes for 1 year and then she goes back home and then she goes back to Hampton. Tuskegee is going to open on July 4, 1881. At that particular time, Fanny is still going to be in Hampton, right? So she's going to remain in Hampton while Washington is in Tuskegee building up the school. While Washington is in Tuskegee, Olivia is then going to join him only a few weeks after the school starts. So although Fanny is going to be his first wife, you see that he is starting the initial digging of ground and laying of spaces with Olivia and not Fanny, right? So Olivia is going to be there roughly about a year before Fanny travels to West Virginia. And there seems to be a sense of commitment that Washington has with Fanny in terms of agreement that he's made. And so you see him really honoring that agreement, and that even though there may be something that is building between him and Olivia, he still marries Fanny. So they're going to go back to Malden, West Virginia to get married. And then Fanny also is going to be very sick. And so although she's only going to be there for 2 years, that really speaks to what she's able to do because she's doing it not in the best health as well. I know you cannot read this, okay? And I'm not going to read it to you. I'm just going to, but basically what this does is it gives a example of how her oral histories are being passed down through her sons and through her sons' wives. And so her son's wife is actually going to write this small article about Olivia. So that's some of the ways that we're able to see who she was. How about time? Okay, so this is who she was as an administrator. As an administrator, she is really side by side. She almost is above Washington in terms of administration. However, she's a female. So she's leading through Washington. So all of the contacts that we see, they're going to be formed through contacts that Olivia is going to have. Even Washington's stage presence and his ability to give speeches, they're going to be performed first for Olivia, who's then going to correct them, and then he goes out and gives them. And so you really see her not just laying the foundation in terms of teaching in the classroom and literally building with her hands, but you also see her grooming him into the Washington that we know. This is a really good one from school, what we find. And what you see within this particular article that's not written until 1933 is how long her connections are in some ways. And so outside of hearing that during this particular time period, they had their own version of audible books where books are being read to them, but you also see that the school is just as invested into Tuskegee through the connections of Olivia. And they're literally knitting underwear and socks and blankets to send back to Tuskegee because of Olivia's connections. This is her as an educator. So she's also in the classroom. And I'll just talk 1 minute about Fanny because I haven't. So in terms of Fanny on campus, and so you're not seeing her a lot in terms of the written word, but what you do see really, I think, builds in terms of the foundation of the school. So 2 things that Fanny was very passionate about. She was very passionate about home domestics, and ensuring that there were spaces on campus that felt like home. So Fanny was very particular about eating at the dining table. She was very particular about dressing up when you ate at the dining table. She was very particular about when visitors came, even though the school is literally starting in a shack, that she was deliberate about making sure that it was clean for visitors and for people who were coming in. And so her influence in that really is going to shape the domestic entities of Tuskegee's early period. And from that, you see Tuskegee's our girls' domestic sciences. And this really is coming from Margaret, who's coming much later, but she's able to speak in many ways about the foundation that Fanny really laid in terms of domestic sciences and how she started the first domestic sciences classes at the Institute, and how she also is starting this movement towards the facility upkeep. And so this is just her legacy. She's going to give birth to the first child on campus. A little short history on Tuskegee is that Tuskegee is going to be created on what is a plantation in Tuskegee, Alabama. Tuskegee, if we had to look at it like this, is going to be split up into a white portion of Tuskegee and the black part of Tuskegee that becomes Tuskegee Institute. That plantation, of course, had enslaved blacks who were born on it, but once Tuskegee actually purchases that plantation for $5,000, their daughter, Portia, is going to be the first child after slavery that's born there. And then the legacy of Olivia. Olivia is going to obviously marry Booker T. Washington after Fanny Smith dies in 1884. So she's going to die at the young age of 26, whereas Olivia is going to live until she's 35. So both of them are going to die very young. Olivia is going to leave behind 2 sons. This is a wedding invitation that Olivia sent to her schools, that is of her and Booker T. Washington. And this is just a family portrait. That's not Portia, and that's a whole another story in terms of Margaret inheriting the children. But Margaret is going to adopt her niece. And so this is her niece, Laura, and these are Booker T. Washington's, our sons, not oldest 2, oldest sons. And that's, did I do good on time?
You did, you're perfect.
Are there any questions? Are we doing questions right
Okay, we'll do, Nora, and we'll do questions.
Okay. Oh, that was fast.
It's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Tamara Bailey. Dr. Bailey is an associate professor of history at West Virginia Wesleyan College in Buchanan. She holds degrees in political science, education, and history. Her research field is African American history in Appalachia, and her teaching fields are world history, African history, and various courses in U.S. history. Her graduate studies were supported by the W.E.B. Du Bois Fellowship and James Madison Fellowship. She has studied the foundations of constitutionalism at Georgetown University, American Revolutionary life at the University of Virginia, and civil rights in the U.S. South and South Africa at Georgia State University. In 2019, Dr. Bailey joined 2 of her Wesleyan colleagues in Ghana for a presentation on teaching Africana Studies at a small liberal arts college at the International Studies Association's International Conference. Please welcome Dr. Bailey. Thank you.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I arrived at Memphis, Tennessee Garrison. I had read her story by Ansela Bickley and used it as a lot of the backdrop for African American experience in McDowell County. She grew up there, was a teacher, and her oral history that was recorded allowed you to have a glimpse at what life is like. So it served the purpose of the chronology of my dissertation, which is the history of African American education in the state of West Virginia, it really served that purpose well. But then, whenever I started digging into implementation, I knew she was in the NAACP, started one of the first chapters as a school teacher, sold Christmas seals, came up with this really neat idea, and the NAACP thought it was great. She actually put the stamps on the envelopes and licked them and sent them out. She just was a really fascinating person. But as I jumped into the 50s, her name just kept coming up. And I was at the Library of Congress looking through the NAACP papers that Dr. Liz Fonesworth made me do. Anybody knows Dr. Fonesworth, you have to go to DC to research. And I had these moments of, wow, okay, this is serious. She's referred to in my first name by the president of the NAACP. He says, just have Memphis do it if we can't get it done, to the state conference president and to the lead litigator, which I'll talk about here in a moment. And so just those roots of her starting this chapter, really having these neat grassroots gifts, made me realize there's a little bit more to the story than she was highly regarded in the NAACP. She single-handedly saved 2 counties from major long-term litigation by what I call strong-arming. And that innocent little smile made people not realize that she was strong-arming some people. So I was going to talk about historiography, but I wasn't sure what our audience is. I think we're good, right? I'd say we're good. And that's usually not anyone's favorite class. Maybe the outcome of it, which is we learned that our stories are told better as time progresses. Because the more people who have access to university life and to records, the better the stories get, right? So whenever I think about this case study on integration, typically I bet most of us know this picture, right? These are the architects behind integration. And we always forget Constance Baker-Motley, right? She is the one who integrates the colleges, walks side by side with James Meredith, writes the litigation. And we always think about Thurbin Marshall, right? And we miss this moment of her story because there was no one that really wanted to tell it at the time. And she and Thurbin Marshall had a great relationship, but he's the Supreme Court Justice, right? So in this case, she's the first African American woman to argue a case before the Supreme Court. She argued 10 cases in one night, okay? That's pretty impressive. And she led them, that led to the integration of University of Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. And she's the first African-American woman to serve as a federal judge. But she has to tell her own story. In 1998, decades after all this action. Now in 2018, 3 years ago, her first biography comes out by an African-American professor. And then her newest glimpse is going to be by an African-American professor at Harvard. And I think about the time lapses that take place. And this is why, even though we want to, whenever we're talking about historiography, it's so true. Because if we don't have the ability to tell our own stories, we are going to miss a piece of the puzzle, okay? So whenever I think about this, I think this is the perfect case study. She has to write her history, right? So in this case, that will bring me back into the dissertation topic, which was the integration of West Virginia. We're often given credit as the first state to fully desegregate. And in my dissertation, I talk about the difference between desegregation and integration, right? To desegregate is to maybe have a couple of counties typically moving black students into white schools, test driving at the Little Rock 9. We desegregated it. Full integration means there are no more black schools that exist in your county. And West Virginia had a harder time being able to claim that it was fully integrated as a state than we often choose to recognize. So in this case, this is a map, and it's improved. You'll see the original one. Somebody decided to sophisticate it and add color, but you can see that no action taken, okay? And this is where Liz Phonesworth said, let's do some case studies of counties that integrated first, counties that struggled, and the assumption that was made by Professor Henry Bullock, he said that typically the larger the population of African Americans, the harder it's going to be to integrate, because there'll be resistance because of racism and so on. So in this case, there are criteria. He had 3. In my exploration, I had 6, okay? Number 1, a strong NAACP at the local and state level. Good communication, because the national office sent pamphlets to every state conference. Then local branches who were interested in pressuring for desegregation received this plan. And it was really a how to force your county to desegregate plan, okay? And the key was to take stock of what the Board of Education's plans were after the announcement of the decision. So I want you to think how much we knew was going to happen if the pamphlets are landing in the hands of the NAACP within weeks of the decision, okay? So in this case, if your local branch is good and your state branch is good, your letters are going to be at the Library of Congress with the NAACP. They're going to know you. They're going to be on a first time. They're going to be on a first name basis. So in this case, the second key is that you have to have an amenable Board of Education, okay? So if your Board of Education feels that they can integrate for a variety of reasons, okay, it's more likely to be successful. What I found is that the NAACP was organized and sat down and had meetings with boards of education. It was really going to usher in not just the conversation, but okay, you're going to integrate when, what date, when will this happen, do you need assistance, and just the constant data keeping. What was so interesting here is that the meetings were always recorded by the officers and sent to New York City for the NAACP to know what each county and each state was doing, and in some cases some local areas. So once you identified there was resistance, then your ability to quickly file a suit would lead to pressure. Now, one of the things that I think we tend to overlook is that the NAACP didn't necessarily have deep pockets, but they had philanthropic pockets. So they would do pro bono work. All these lawyers who were inspired by trained lawyers at Howard would work together and take cases and push this. So the goal was to break the county budget, the county treasury, by constantly battering them with the court cases and also with really demanding updates. So amenable judges is key. The coolest part about West Virginia is that our district judges were amenable. They said, let's do it. Here's the proof. We believe that the Supreme Court is the law of the land. Our state leadership, our governor, Marlin, believes that we should integrate. Our education secretary believes we should integrate. Our attorney general believes we should integrate. Now, I will tell you that the attorney general and the governor of the Southern District clerked for that judge, okay? So they had this really neat relationship. But the agreement was, we're going to integrate, okay? The state's economy, another reason why West Virginia integrated is because it was expensive to run 2 school systems, 2 bus systems, and in counties that had large black populations, you're talking about 20 schools, at least for black and white students in large coal mining areas. So in this case, a lot of the research reveals that it was a lot cheaper, and money makes people move. And in this case, my 6th one is you had to have Memphis, Tennessee Garrison to really lock in integration. So these are our state leadership. Governor Marlin at the time, the youngest elected governor, and W.W. Trent, who served, 30 years as the state superintendent of schools. And they liked one another and fully agreed that the state needed to integrate. W.W. Trent had long-standing relationships with just about every county, and immediately, they didn't waver one time about integration. So you wouldn't get buy-in from state leadership if you chose to resist. These are just some responses that reinforce reinforce that assertion. In letters, the correspondence was really neat. Whenever they would edit each other's work and say, I like your speech, I like what you're going to release. But again, it's more than just having a governor, an attorney general, and a superintendent of schools that integrates. It's the NAACP leadership. And here, our state president was one of the first Black elected legislators. And he identified the That's interesting. The second is the Charleston chapter's president. And he's the one who would actually file suit. Okay? He was very quick to do so. His father was actually an attorney too. And then there was Memphis, Tennessee Garrison. And as I was studying her, I kept thinking, she's Olivia Pope. You have a problem, you're going to send in Memphis, Tennessee Garrison. She's going to fix this problem, right? And she did. So West Virginia's plan was to follow the pamphlet, the national directive. So the first thing they do is they observe the data. A lot of newspapers said, again, problem counties are going to be these ones with large populations. So they identify some of the large population areas. Then they identify some major red flags. This one was not on the list. Cabell, Memphis, Tennessee Garrison put Cabell on the list and said, we're going to have problems here. Okay? And then you sue the pants off the boards of education if they don't follow. And I put this in bold letters and wrote it numerous times because they did it and they did it quickly. So this was that original map I was telling you about. And you can see again, we have pockets of problem areas in West Virginia. And it makes sense, right? The numbers argument on the surface looks about right. Compliant counties. They immediately desegregate small Black populations. And then we have counties with resistance. We see here, McDowell County, Logan, Raleigh, Cabell, 4.2. Why would they have a problem? Okay? And we begin to see that the data doesn't always make the perfect prediction. So, Memphis, Tennessee Garrison's job is to try to communicate with locals and make sure that their NAACP is following the directive if they feel there might not be a proper response. So again, this story gave a great foundation, but it was actually looking at the records, minutes, board minutes in Cabell County, quite frankly, and these letters between the NAACP, T.G. Nutter, Attorney Brown, and Memphis, Tennessee Garrison that made me realize she made these things happen, okay? So, she's remembered for a lot of the accomplishments that were published in the book that I just featured. She sent textbooks to Africa, she shed light on the desegregation movement, worked with children and on others on what was considered a lost cause. The list of accomplishments is many. But this county and this county really highlight how prolific her work was. And I called it the Send Memphis Doctrine. Okay? You have a problem, send Memphis. Gloucester Current from the national office said, listen, if you two can't get in there, send Memphis. Okay? So these two trouble counties get the Garrison treatment. The first one is Cabell. That's her home turf. That's how she knew there was going to be a problem. But it wasn't predicted to resist. Logan County actually had a rogue NAACP branch that actually went against the directive. And somebody tattled within the NAACP because they have the pamphlet. You're not following the rules. And I'll talk about that here in a minute why. So here in Cabell County, they do what they're supposed to do. They meet with the Board of Education. They say, we're going to take care of it. Never discuss it in any board meeting. It's not on the agenda. They do the next step. They petition and show we want to integrate. The third one is whenever Mgt Eckhart, the notorious MGT, goes to the meeting and she is referred to in the board minutes, not by name, but as a Negro woman speaking on behalf of the delegation. Now, Marion County integrated rather quickly because they had a cohesive relationship with the NAACP. The fact that they didn't even know who she was and she was this annoying Black lady tells you they had no idea who they were dealing with, which makes me giggle because they're going to find out really quickly. So they claim eventually that'll take place in the near future. Okay, this is a page out of the How to Prevent Desegregation playbook that you would see with the Southern Manifesto. Okay, again, kind, gentle, sweet, smiling Memphis, Tennessee Garrison. So she ends up heading into conversation, and they file suit. And the Southern School News, which set up branches all over the South to report on the desegregation process, says, holy cow, they filed suit against Cabell County. They don't have big numbers. What's going on? Memphis, Tennessee Garrison lived there. That's what's going on. So they submit a list of grievances, and they constantly monitor, if not badger, this Board of Education to integrate. They give them numbers, they give them neighborhoods, and they came up with this freedom of choice plan. I don't know how familiar you are with desegregation, but they would let parents choose which school their children were going to go to. Surprise, surprise, white students wanted to still go to white school, and a lot of black families weren't too interested in being a part of a scientific experiment where they sent their kids to white schools. So in this case, they're given a timeline, and the NAACP constantly asks for updates, and by 1961, that's a little bit of a long time, right? By 1961, the whole county is integrated. They closed a school here, closed a school there, but it took till 1961 for them to fully integrate. So again, our other county is Logan. And here what happens is the NAACP chats with the Board of Education, whose agenda is not to integrate, okay? The teachers, why would you think they wouldn't want to integrate? Why wouldn't they want to go by what the NAACP, why would the NAACP say, no, let's not pressure, we'll stay desegregated? Why do you think that they would take that approach? Any thoughts?
Might lose their jobs.
They might lose their jobs, okay? They might lose their jobs. And these teachers, their income's the bread and butter of their families. Often their husbands are working in the coal mine. And the teachers, the principals are typically men, not in every case. But if they lose their job, they're not going to be able to provide for their family. And they feel the odds are stacked against them, that if the school integrates or the county integrates, they won't be hired. Okay? So eventually, Willard Brown threatens to file suit, but first, we got to fix that NAACP problem. Okay? And Ancella Bickley, okay, reminds us that the problem is going to be deep. Okay? So in this case, with the NAACP, send Memphis, Gloucester Current says. Memphis goes in and dismantles the whole leadership of the NAACP. Basically goes in and says you're fired. Okay? Then they hold new elections. And I mean, this happened in 2 months. Boom, boom, done. And then the next thing you know, the NAACP correspondent says, hi, I'm the new president of the Logan County branch, and we won't be pursuing this resistance. Okay? So it's this fascinating moment where you see she goes in, we spoke with Ms. Garrison, and she helped us run new elections. She wasn't playing games. And then guess what? The NAACP was now amenable to integration in Logan County. So, amenable. The Board of Education was not. They had to be sued. They were forced, and eventually they integrated. But here's the kicker. Those teachers in the NAACP that were dismantled were right. Okay? Logan County is one of the whitest counties in the state of West Virginia today, because without the schools and those teachers not being hired, we saw a mass exodus of teachers leaving the state within that period. Okay, and it's really a sad story that is really this day of reckoning that we tend to have to maybe revisit with this hardline approach that the NAACP took. All right, so Ancella Bickley introduces me to this woman. Further research makes me realize, oh, this woman is the real deal. But then I'm doing my research and I come across this picture, right? Do you not want to be friends with her? I mean, here, look at her. She is exuding confidence, right? She writes this book and she tells Memphis' story, okay? So the connection is she goes on to tell a lot of stories. So side note, my mom was a WVU in the early 70s. White woman from Hampshire County, grew up in Goodwin, Preston County, and she wants to take Ancella Bickley for African American history, for African American literature, sorry. And I mean, this woman is a legend. She built this program from the ground up. So my mom goes in the first day and this white man walks in. My mom's like, what? I thought I was going to have Aunt Stella Bickley. And Aunt Stella Bickley actually left, okay, to go pursue her career, finishes her doctorate, pursues her career at West Virginia State, okay? So my mom, the professor, was very nervous about teaching the class, didn't quite know what he was doing, but my mom gave him like the valiant, you did it, and named me after him. Named me after this poor guy. I could have been Aunt Stella, but I wasn't, okay? And I was named after Nicholas E. Lee, who designed the English business department. So she's responsible for really writing West Virginia's history. If you Google African Americans, if you Google maybe integration, all these articles in West Virginia's encyclopedia are going to come up. And this is a woman who studied literature, right? And became fascinated with the African American experience. Every single one of these, I unwittingly touched on all of these in my research. I interviewed Rose Agnes Wool's cousins' daughters, okay, for my interview. And they're like, my mom was a pilot, right? She studied at Tuskegee. And they were telling me all these stories. And then I realized, yeah, she was a pilot. She demanded to go train down there. She comes back to Fairmont and brings her two daughters who become very shocked that her daughters are the ones who integrate in Marion County, right? So all of these little stories, I'm having all these moments of Aunt Stella Bickley meant business, right? So what happens is, somehow, and Nikki will be able to tell the story better than me, but there was a lot of diplomacy involved in asking the Bickleys, because her husband was quite the revolutionary too, to donate their papers to the library, okay? And for me, NAACP papers for West Virginia, it was 10 full days, first one there, last one there at the Library of Congress to look at them all, okay? So in this case, they finally give these papers. And Rory highlights the details of what's in there. So I come across this as I'm working on my next research project. And I said, Rory and I go back to 2006, okay? Because I'm always badgering her about everything she knows. Librarians know everything, okay? And if they don't, they find it for you. So in this case, she highlights and talks about what's in these papers. And then, of course, we notice, again, it's Aunt Stella Bickley writing about other people, okay, that are the contents of this paper. But I'm looking at that lady lean back in that chair. No, this isn't really about her research anymore, okay? It's about her. Why haven't we told her story? It's 2021, okay? We're telling the story about Booker T. Washington's wives. We're telling the story about Constance Baker Motley in 2018 and again in 2022. She told everyone's story, and it's her turn, okay? So I forced myself into the library. Rory says, Tamara, you can't come here, it's COVID. But you can come on Monday. I mean, this is like perfect, right? So I go in, and she's like, it's a lot of papers. I was like, I've been to the NAACP papers at the Library of Congress. It couldn't be a lot of papers, right? She's like, it's boxes. I'm like, okay, it's boxes. She goes, no, there are big boxes. And there are 9 boxes in this collection, right? They're big boxes. I thought I thought I was going to get 80, 90% done. I got through 3 boxes. 300 images reported that were relevant to my research that reminded me why we need to tell her story. And Stella Bickley, her husband was the nephew of Carter G. Woodson, the founder of African American History Month, at the time History Week, okay? And her own family members were long-standing educators, and the idea of literacy and writing and learning were instilled in her. And she's private, right? So she gives up all these papers. And I'm looking through, Rory says where to start. She's like, if you want to go in, you probably should start here, you should start here. And I decided I was going to call her family and do an interview. And they said no. Maybe they thought they already gave her papers. She's not well. And I would imagine there's probably some stress that comes along with having an old family member. I've been through that myself. And whenever I thought, how do I research someone that I know nothing about? A good bit of my dissertation was on interviews. She doesn't know anything about her people. people. So I let this wall kind of build up, okay? And I forgot that my research is going to have to be digging deep, right? And getting in those records. But I was really intimidated. But 9 boxes, banker boxes of papers, multiple boxes of papers. And I slowly start finding her husband's military papers. It has everything on it, right? So now all my silly questions I've been bothering her family with, those can go to the wayside. I can find some of this. But they're so private. She never talks about herself, except in the earlier interviews, okay? This is her 1969, right before my mom was going to go take Ansel Victor's class, right? And she's talking about who she is. But it's very topical, okay? It's very topical, but amazing nonetheless. And then I find some of her research interests were very much about slavery. This is a letter where she reaches out to the Preston County, these curators asking, do you have anything you want to share? And then she shows them this letter from a slave who requested to be purchased by the Stump family in Preston County. I know there are things there, would you be willing to share them, right? So in this case, we see her dabble, and we see a lot, no stone unturned. I can't believe they turned over that many papers. It's really amazing. But I'm just starting. But just that brief look into those archives and reading the NAACP papers and reading these board minutes, it just reminds me that historians are here to tell stories, and we tell the stories that haven't been told because in the past, we didn't have that level of interest, okay? So to me, Ansela Bigley, it's her turn. It's her time to have her story told. It's going to be a big old undertaking. Jen, I don't know if you have a class that wants to start doing some research, but it's going to be an undertaking. But it will be a neat story to finally tell. And that's it for me.
Well, thank you, Dr. Harris, and thank you, Dr. Bailey. We have some time for questions. And this can be pretty informal. We're a small group, and there's also refreshments waiting for us. But what questions do we have?
I have a question for Sheena. Can I ask?
Yes, I mean, no one else is.
You go first.
I had a bunch of questions for her. And I don't want, because I was writing down, I should have brought my daggone binder. Okay. I'm concentrating more on, I know your stuff. I mean, I've read chapter 3 and 4 of the dissertation, so. And I know Ansela, so I'm going to. And Memphis Teague. Memphis Teague, by the way, is in Huntington.
He's from Cabell County.
I'm from Huntington, West Virginia. Hi, Jennifer. My name is Cecil Fang. I'm the author of Black Huntington, an Appalachian story. And also, if I may take a moment, this is so wonderful. The connectivity, the intersections about people, black people in Appalachia, black women. It is so wonderful to see. I'm just so gratified. And I think we can build upon it. And we will build upon it. I gotta invite you down. Yeah, there we go.
Not 79.
So I want to talk about Olivia. Where in West Virginia was she from? And where in Ohio did she go?
She's out of Malden, so she's right outside of this area.
Okay.
And then she goes to Athens.
Ah, interesting. Okay. How about her slave parentage?
So her
Family dynamic and those kind of things.
Olivia.
Yes.
So Olivia, interestingly, her mother and father are born free.
Right, you said so.
Yeah.
How about the family dynamic? I guess what I'm interested in is,
How are they paying for this movement?
yes.
So that I'm not able to actually get at yet. But there is wealth there. So she doesn't pay for any of her schooling. Most of the initial funds that are coming into Tuskegee, I want to say, let's say like the first 4 years, if Tuskegee is raising $2,000, 1,900 are from her donors, are from her form of philanthropy. That wealthy donors who she knows, the other $100 is coming from her literally going door to door. There's one story where someone was retelling this oral history to Booker T. Washington, and she basically was saying, we need to look after Olivia. She was so tired the other day that she was just trying to get a little funds from me that she fell asleep on my sofa. She didn't say sofa, but she fell asleep on the chair while she was so she is really working herself to exhaustion. Like, she is tapping into anything someone can give. She's like, no, I'm going to write this letter. Washington, you have to come with me because she's not traveling on her own at this particular time, and I'll speak, but you introduce me. So he'll introduce her, and then she's the one that is, I literally think that the next project should be Olivia. And if Olivia would have lived longer, and just her energy from how other people are talking about her as well is dynamic, right? And so I think the thing that really takes her down at the end is there's a house fire. And so with the house fire, 3 months after her son is born, she dies. But I want to say that Ernest maybe was 2 weeks old when the house caught on fire. And so from that time until these 3 months, she just doesn't recover, but she also doesn't have a good health record throughout her life. So oftentimes they'll say she's coughing a lot or things of this sort, even before she gets to Tuskegee. So, but all of his wives really are experiencing that. And then you see when Margaret comes, she doesn't have any children. And so there's this one dynamic that she's not having children because of what happened to Washington's first 2 wives with children, but then it's also this idea that she just can't, right, because of her health. So back to your original question, there is wealth there. I need to figure out how they're able to tap into these resources, because even when she goes to Athens, her father is going to die within 2 years of them moving. So here you have a female head of household, 10 children, and one of her sisters who she and Booker T. Washington marry at her house, she's a doctor. Her husband is a doctor. And so the family's wealth continues to be there. I just don't know where it started. So my prediction is that her parents' owners left them something, because you don't find them in any entrepreneurial field. So like if I think of Mary Church Terrell, her father is really getting out there. Her mother is starting a beauty shop. You don't see that with Olivia. Her mother is in domestic entities. Her father, the only thing that she writes about him is he's working in the mines. And so here you have people that presumably are common folk are able to do uncommon things in a time period where it's not common. And so what are these things? Yeah, it's fascinating. She is 7. So
I wonder if older siblings and their spouses at these positions would have helped, because Ohio has a really strong education system. So I wonder if there were connections and uplift just with the societies that would have assisted. I mean, if she's going door to door getting those, I wonder if it was maybe a bit more generous than we would see in West Virginia, where there isn't that level of that sophisticated education and connection.
Yeah, so I need to look into that. And also, when they're leaving West Virginia, they're leaving with other families as well. So you kind of see this push out of West Virginia into Ohio. So it wasn't that they were just, let's go to Athens. It literally was like this migration that they were following into the area. So I do need to do more digging into their archives that are there. Yeah. I'm gonna make my answer shorter. Go ahead. What's the next one?
Was she aware of her privilege?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And I would say aware in the sense that she was like, don't know if you ever met someone who they just have so much and they know they have a short time period to give it, and she just wants to give it. Like when she's in Memphis, Tennessee, she has students, and one of her students ends up getting sick. The parents are like, listen, if you get sick as well, you're going to die. Like this could negatively impact you. And Olivia's like, no, I'm staying until she's back well, because she was under my care when she got sick. So she's constantly pouring into every place that she goes into. And so, but she also speaks of these things in terms of, I have access to them in ways that other folk don't. And so what good is it for me to just covet it and not to extend what I'm doing onto others? And so for her, I think that we often in our psyche, we think of Tuskegee Institute, Booker T. Washington. Tuskegee Institute is Olivia. Like Tuskegee Institute in terms of the curriculum, in terms of where they're going to purchase the school, the funding to purchase. Booker T. Wash doesn't have any money or connections. Like his connections are Armstrong. And Armstrong is like, listen, you just got a degree in brick mason. Like teach them how to do bricks and build it out. Whereas Olivia is like, yes, but how do we purchase the bricks? This is how we purchase the bricks, and this is how we purchase the land. This is how we get a loan, and not just get a loan, this is how we pay it off. And so you see them borrowing money, but pay, like, she is the foundation, I think, and she is very cognizant of this wealth of knowledge and access that she has. Yeah.
I have one more question, and I'm done. This is for both of them. Sisters are both, Olivia and Memphis, are both educated travelers. Did you come across any tensions between their station in life and their interaction with the Black working class?
Me? Not really.
Okay.
I think because, even though she grew up in the South, I think any tension that would have come maybe from the elite status of African Americans, but the NAACP was all inclusive.
Yeah.
You paid your dues, you got your crisis magazine, that automatically created a community. And there was always an agenda.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like the NAACP would have circumvented any class tension that would have existed there. Plus, she's in there fighting for those children, right? So that's a different set of circumstances, and maybe that she would be a teacher that would be dictating things at that point. She was a teacher, but now she's in the NAACP grassroots organizer. So she's working on behalf of the children to integrate schools. Now, she did meet the tension in Logan County, but she came there to fix the problem, right? I'm sure they didn't like it very much.
There's one political ideological as opposed to class-based.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was trying to think of it as you were speaking as well. I would say no, based on two things. One, in terms of race as well. So Olivia could have easily passed. And you find her deliberately saying, no, I am a Black woman. And I'm a Black woman who's moving, and this is my Black husband. And we're educating these Blacks. Like, she was very, very deliberate on where her place was, even when you saw other people attempting to say, but you can have this life of luxury, right? This is my life. So I would say that one. The other one, I would say no in the sense of connected to that, but she doesn't choose to sit. And I think that worker bee type of mentality just shows that she doesn't enter a space as though she's better. She enters into the spaces as, I have wealth that I want to share. And now how do I get this wealth to you? And one of the things that is interesting of Tuskegee, and I'm sure it's interesting of most small Black areas, is that they are very suspicious of outsiders coming in, attempting to bring civilization or bring these things that that shows how backwards they are, right? And so you see a lot of this, and Olivia is just, how do I meet you where you are? and how do I eat with you? So she would go into places and she would eat their food, right? In ways that you see Booker T. Washington like, I'm not about to eat pork fat anymore. Let me tell you why pork fat is not good for you. Olivia, you don't know from what they write if she enjoyed it or not, but she's eating it. And I think that speaks to her ability to connect. Yeah. But that was good because that's making me think about her in other ways, because typically, because there's so much, well, when I started with Margaret, I was like, there's nothing on Margaret. Like, you have to piece together so many things because everything is on Booker T. Washington. And not saying that Booker T. Washington is bad, but everything is there even if it wasn't him. He's getting credit for it. Whereas with Olivia, she is not getting credit for anything. And I mean, she is all over the place in terms of the foundation. And so is Fanny as well, but just in different ways. But yeah.
Do you know if these women knew each other, Olivia, Fanny, if they kind of knew each other, what those interactions were like, or if they had similar kind of ideas about how things should go? And
so, yes and no. So, Fanny is in West Virginia until she is 17. Olivia leaves when she's 5, but they don't cross paths when they're younger either. And then when Olivia is at Hampton, Fanny is at Hampton, but she goes back to West Virginia, and Olivia is only there for 1 year. The 1 year that Olivia is there, Fanny's not there. When Fanny comes back to Hampton, Olivia has already gone to Tuskegee. And so I say that to say that by the time that Fanny gets to Hampton, she knows of Olivia through word of mouth, because Washington is also connecting with Olivia while she's at Hampton as well. But he doesn't know her in the sense of, oh, you should come to Tuskegee with me. What's his name? Armstrong, who is the president of Hampton at the time, is going to be the one that really connects all of them together. And so when Washington goes back to Tuskegee, he's going to say, oh, I know the perfect person. Like, literally, she's finishing graduate school and they send her a letter and she doesn't even have time to rest. And a week later, she's in Tuskegee. Like, that's just how fast paced. And with travel, it probably took a week to get to Tuskegee. It takes a week to get to Tuskegee now if you're in a car, right? And so just thinking about that, like, she literally was on it. So did that answer your question? They knew of each other, but not directly. They weren't friends. But Booker T. Washington and Fanny grew up together. So they were friends.
I have a question for both of you. I was wondering to get your thoughts about the intersection of sort of oral history and written records, because you're sort of talking about how like oral history became written, right? And I think we had that situation too where people were telling stories, so sort of these oral traditions became, sometimes they get into the archive, like the written archival record, and sometimes they don't. So I was kind of curious to get, yeah, like sort of both of you, how
Well,
that...
I'm spoiled because a lot of the people who integrated schools are still alive. I had one woman who's Rose Agnes Knowles' cousins, her daughter passed away last year unexpectedly, and that was really sad. But West Virginia is small, and I literally taught a student whose last name was Ezel, and I said, was your grandfather a principal in Marion County at a black school? Yes, he was. And her grandmother is still alive, and she's in her 90s and had the best memory of anybody I interviewed. But this man was the principal of Thornton Elementary, I believe. And when they integrated the schools rather quickly, it's a great story, but that's another day. He had his master's degree from Columbia, and he was the janitor in the school. How does that happen? And so Jocelyn's grandmother was able to tell me the indignity for 1 year that he had to face so he could maybe apply for an opening as principal. And this is the most educated person in the building student force. And being able to make that connection, that's the beauty of living in West Virginia, that I couldn't believe. I said, Giselle. And I couldn't believe it. And we still have a neat connection despite the fact that she's graduated and went to law school. But her grandmother's probably been my greatest source. And then the other greatest source for oral traditions, the Belmere family. And the Belmeres were huge in Marion County. And Michael went on to work at Fairmont. And Diane actually went on to be the elementary school teacher of the author of Little Fires Everywhere. And there's this moment in this interview where she says, I really learned how to write by my elementary school teacher. And it was Diane Belmere, educated in Marion County, West Virginia. And just the privilege of doing that, it's such a privilege, Jen, that like now I'm intimidated by not having anybody to interview, have to dig into the records. That's how what a perk it is to be able to do that type of experience. So I feel really what Sheena, when you're digging and asking these questions, when it's just you and the documents, it is a puzzle. And having the gift of somebody's diaries, having the gift of conversations, letters, that's really a distinctive privilege with the oral traditions pretty neat stuff too.
And to quickly answer it, gold mine, I think also you say something that's really important is the privilege of it, right? And so many of these women, they're thinking about how do I build these things around me as opposed to how do I leave a legacy of who I am for someone else to come and better understand me. They're far too private and far too conservative in that way. And so even when I have the privilege of having letters from Margaret and Booker, you have to read between the line and like, oh, this is what because they're not outright saying it, right? And so I think that's an interesting part, but also what we don't find with Fanny is that she is not doing the oral history. She's not telling people, my father was, and my mother was, and I was a slave, and she's not saying any of that. And so a lot of the things are lost in terms of her, whereas with Olivia, you do see her doing it more, where she's retelling these stories to different people, and then they are writing it from their perspective. The flip of that, and I keep bringing Margaret in, but the flip of that is Margaret also has a number of oral history retellings of who she was, but she changes them a lot as well. And so you'll have 4 different accounts of her youth, and they're so different. And I'm like, is Margaret lying or is she forgetting? Like, is she recreating it? But it's all of those things, right? It's this idea of shame. It's this idea of not knowing and the shame of not knowing. It's this idea of what we give importance to and what they gave importance to. And so it's so many things. And so she was born in 1861, 1862, 1863, and 1865, right? And so I'm looking at this and I'm like, why is she telling all of these people these different stories? Like, what am I supposed to do with this? And so what you do find is that in between those oral histories, just like in between the diaries and in between any other primary document, is the truth. And sometimes that truth isn't as black and white. Sometimes that truth is just that when you don't know, you fake it until you make it. And you find a lot of them creating their spaces of who they are from that type of perspective. So yes, they're very valuable. And when I don't have them, I'm like, But I think also the void has voice. And it also tells a story in the same way that 4 different accounts has voice as well. It just makes my job harder, but it also makes it fun. And it keeps me sort of thinking about it in a multitude of ways.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thanks.